In the previous lecture, we had started talking about star-star power system. I'm going to repeat a bit so that we can maintain continuity. Basically, we took a balanced, lossless YY system as shown in the figure here. The phase voltages are VAN, VBN, VCN, where A, B, C, N are small letters. On the load side, we have got a balanced load, Z capital A, Z capital B, Z capital C are all equal to ZPH. And then we have a neutral wire also, which has got current I small n. And based on this diagram, I wrote the values of the phase voltages in complex domain as shown by equation 1 and 2, assuming positive phase sequence. And then the phase 3 voltage is also written here. Okay. I also noted down lot of cosine and sine values that would be needed all the time when doing three-phase system analysis. You can always calculate them on the calculator, so there's no need to remember them. Just that I need to see them in front of me a lot of times. Okay. Then, based on the KVL, I started calculating the line voltages. V small b is V small a small n minus V small b small n. And here I plug in the values of VAN and VBN as written here in equation 1 and 2. And I simplify the result. VAN is simply VM multiplied by 1 plus J0. There is no phase shift in it. VBN is VM e to the power minus J 120 degrees. So cos of 120 degrees minus J sine of 120 degrees. Cos of 120 degrees is minus 0.5. Sine of 120 degrees is minus 0.5. No, cannot be. Oh, minus square root of 3 by 2. Yeah, that's what I've done here. So, yeah. So then I simplify the result, take VM out. I get equation 6, which further simplifies. And I have done it in the previous lecture, so I'll just get to the end result. What we found was that the line voltage magnitude is square root of 3 times the magnitude of the phase voltage. And there is a plus 30 degree phase shift in VAB compared to VAN. VAN is the reference voltage, which will be assumed to have zero phase shift. And then we did the same thing for the second line voltage using this equation. Again, we found that magnitude is higher by a factor of square root of 3 when you compare the magnitude with the magnitude of the phase voltage. And phase shift gets shifted by minus 120 degrees, so it becomes minus 90 degrees in VBC. And then VCA finally also has the same magnitude as the other two line voltages, but phase shift becomes minus 210 degrees. The magnitude of the line to line voltage is same in this case. We call it VLL. It is square root of 3 into VM. Okay. In RMS sense also, you can write square root of 3 into VPH as long as VPH is VM divided by square root of 2. Either way, it's fine. Then line currents are very easy to figure out. We did this last time using a single phase equivalent circuit. For one phase, you draw one single circuit, and then you use Ohm's law to calculate the current. Current in the neutral wire, I showed it last time, and the derivation is shown once again here. Current in the neutral wire turned out to be 0 for a balanced case. Total power consumed in the load in the complex domain also was worked out. It turned out to be equal for all the three branches of the load. So I summed up the result, and this is what I got. Okay. The total complex power in the load has a real part and an imaginary part. We can draw a power diagram also if necessary. Then I also showed that in time domain, if we calculate the instantaneous power and simplify the result, you can go through this derivation. It turns out that the time domain power has only a non-time dependent term, which is one of the biggest advantages of three-phase system, that at least in theory they allow the instantaneous power to be free of time dependence. In practice, it's not that easy because the system is never balanced. Okay. The value of the power consumed is same whether you do it using time domain or using phasor domain. It can be easily written out. These things are fairly straightforward to look at. Then I started looking at a numerical problem, and let me do it once again today. It's an ideal, lossless, balanced three-phase load, three-phase system actually. We are supposed to calculate the total consumed power in the load. F is 60 Hertz. So we do per phase analysis. For phase A, we draw, although I have not drawn in the numerical example itself, but here I showed that we draw this kind of a circuit. And using that, we calculate the phase current A. R is 1 ohm, although scan is not done correctly, so you don't see ohm. Take it from me that R is 1 ohm in all the three branches, and L is 2 millihenry in all the branches. Something has been missed in scanning, but you can fill it up yourself. So in phase A, the current is simply VAN divided by the impedance of branch A in the load, R plus j omega. So that calculation is easy to do. I get R plus j omega L converted into polar form as having a magnitude of 1.2524 ohm and a phase angle of 37.02 degrees. That goes in the formula. You do the calculation. And since the values given are RMS values for voltages, the currents also will be RMS values directly. Okay. SA is VAN into IA complex conjugate. Half will not be there because we are dealing with RMS values of voltage. So you can check it out yourself. SBSC will be same as SA in S. Will be same as SA because of the balanced nature of the system. So go through these calculations. I'm sure you'll be able to see the justification for all the answers. There were some points to remember. We have done all this in the previous lecture. I'm just going through it once again. Okay. A few things to remember. When comparing star system with delta system are given here. In the star connection, the line current and phase current have the same magnitude. In delta connection, they differ by a factor of square root of 3. Line current is higher. We'll show that soon. In the star connection, the magnitude of the line voltage is higher by a factor of square root of 3. In the delta connection, the line voltage magnitude is same as the magnitude of the phase voltage. Okay. The total power consumed, real power consumed in the load in a balanced system is given by the same formula, whether it's a delta-delta system or Y-Y system. We are going to do the derivation for delta-delta system very soon. So this is what we did last time. And this is where we stopped, I think. I showed you one example where if a generator is broken, can we continue to supply power? And we found that in some cases, yes, in star connection, it's not that easy, but for delta connection, it's definitely okay. There's a second document also. This shows the complex power calculations once again in more details. And here I am assuming that line is lossy. I'm taking single phase equivalence. So for phase A, I'm assuming that generator has no losses. It is only the transmission line which has a loss characterized by an impedance ZL. So the equivalent circuit now has this additional load, additional impedance ZL between source and load. So total impedance now will be ZPH plus ZL. And accordingly, everything has to be changed. Calculation of complex power on the generator side and on the load side can be done. And now the interesting part is that there will be some voltage drop, complex voltage drop across ZL. That has to be accounted for. It's all circuit theory, really. Once you have drawn the equivalent circuit, everything is boiling down to Kirchhoff's laws and Ohm's law. I don't remember any of these equations. I try to do numerical calculations directly using my understanding of circuit theory. Okay, so phase B, similar things. Phase C, similar things. Then you sum up the three complex powers to get the total complex power. And it turns out that the three complex powers are again equal because load system is still balanced. Although loss has come, that does not change the balanced nature of the system. All the transmission lines are assumed to have the same loss. So the balanced nature of the system does not go. Here is a solved problem. A YY balanced three-phase system with a phase voltage of 120 volt RMS, positive phase sequence, has a line impedance Z line. Sometimes I call it Z lines, sometimes I call it ZL. So be careful. The line impedance is 1 plus J1 ohm, and the load impedance is ZY equal to 20 plus J10 ohm. It's a balanced load. Determine the phasor line currents IAA, IBB, ICC, and the power and the phasor load voltages. Yeah, not power. Sorry, my bad handwriting. Okay, so VAN will be simply 120 volt RMS multiplied by square root of 2 because I'm writing peak values. 0 degrees, VBN will be the same value but with minus 120 degree phase shift. VCN same value with minus 240 degree phase shift. which will become plus 240, sorry, plus 120 degrees if necessary. Then I draw the equivalent circuit for phase A and use the KVL to figure out the current. First, I write the total impedance, which is ZY plus Z line. It is all calculations, Conceptually, it's not that difficult to understand what is going on. So total impedance in the circuit is now known 3.7065 with an angle of 27 point something degrees. So this is for phase A. So IAA now can be written as VAN divided by that impedance, simplify the result. And since I'm taking VAN in peak value, so IAA would also be peak value. And I can convert that result into RMS if necessary, which is what I have done at the end. These are the answers. For now, one issue remains that the voltage on the load side will be different from the voltage on the generator side because of the loss in the transmission lines. So the load side VAN is something that I'm writing as V capital A capital N, which will be V small a small n minus IAA into Z line. Obviously, this is simple KVL. Again, lot of calculations. Plugging in all the values gives me VAN on the load side as this value. Now I repeat the same thing for phase B. The starting point will have now minus 120 degree phase shift. Methodology remains virtually the same. Then for phase C, so essentially this is how you calculate the voltages on the load side. Total complex power on the generator side can be calculated also. This is next problem anyway. In the case considered in problem 1, calculate SG. That means total complex power on the generator side. PG is the real part of SG. QG is the imaginary part of SG. Okay. And then SL means total complex power on the load side. PL is the real part of SL and QL is the imaginary part of SL. Try to follow these calculations. They just need you to be careful and accurate. That's it. Everything is known from the previous problem. It's a matter of doing the power calculations. I am adding the three load powers, three independent, three per phase powers on the load side, and then I'm getting the total power in complex loop. It's a fairly involved calculation that you see here. I'm hoping there is no calculation mistake. Okay. Okay, now they want line currents. Again, calculations. And the system is now slightly different. 440 volt is the value of each phase voltage, and I assume it's RMS. Okay, it is positive phase sequence again. Lines have no losses, fortunately, which is nice. Load is balanced, 6 minus J8 ohm throughout, which is also nice. So this problem should be simple actually. $440 divided by Z, which is given here. IAA is known then, and it turns out to be almost 44 amperes with 53.13 degree angle. RMS value. Peak value will be this multiplied by square root of 2. Same thing about I've not done the calculation here completely, but I've given you the polar form at least. You can do the rest. And same thing about ICC. Get the rectangular form also from these. Now sketch the power triangle for the system shown in problem 3. This is what power engineers end up doing most of the time. Total power on the generator side is Sg in complex domain. Magnitude of that is shown as the hypotenuse of the triangle. The horizontal axis is denoting Pg, vertical axis is denoting Qg. It is negative, I think. That's why I'm plotting it downwards. So make sure you understand how this power diagram has been drawn. You try to sketch the diagram as accurately as possible without using scales. Proportionality should be maintained in drawing it. Face angle phi is also known to us, so that is also approximately shown in the diagram. Okay. So that's about YY systems. Fairly complex calculations are involved, and if you're careful, you should be able to get to the answers correctly. Now, how about delta-delta system, which is the second one in line? No neutral here, for sure. Three generators, balanced, lossless on the left-hand side, three loads balanced on the right-hand side, delta connection throughout, line losses. Actually, line has been assumed now to have some impedance, Z line. Fine. The three generators, the three phases, in other words, will have the voltages well known to us, assuming positive phase sequence. But the way they are connected makes a lot of difference. It is not Y connection anymore. It is delta connection. What will happen? First of all, because of the KVL around the loop on the generator side, you should have VAB plus VBC plus VCA equal to 0. And I think that is satisfied. You can check it out yourself. Put the values of e to the power minus j120 degrees and e to the power plus j120 degrees. You should get 0. So the people who thought about delta system were right in assuming these voltages. At least that KVL is satisfied. Then what? One thing you can clearly see that the line voltages VAB, VBC and VCA will be same as phase voltages because of the way the connections are made. However, the phase currents will not be equal to line currents. One phase current will come from the left hand side, let's say node small a. On that, one current will come from the left generator, one from the other generator. Those will add up to give you the line current, IAA. So line currents will not be equal to phase currents here, but line voltages will be equal to phase voltages. ICA, which is one of the line currents, is IAB plus IAA. ICA, wait a minute. IAB plus IAA. Okay, so essentially IAA is ICA minus IAB. KCL at node A, node small a. That's what I'm doing here. Okay. Then I plug in the values of ICA and ICB, which are fairly straightforward. And simplify the result. Again, a lot of complex algebra is involved. So what I see is that ICA has a phase shift of 120 degree plus, minus the load angle of the load of each branch of the load. And not only that, the line lossage will also make a difference. The value of Z means the total load in one of the phases, which means ZPH plus Z line. It's not probably written well here, but you should be able to see that. If you draw per phase equivalence, the path will have Z line plus ZPH impedance. So that is actually supposed to be Z. Okay. This simplifies a lot. I made a mistake also in simplifying, but I corrected myself, I think. IA turns out to be square root of 3 times ICA and a 30 degree phase angle. This is what the first line current turns out to. It is square root of 3 multiplied by ICA, or one of them anyway. Let's see, what did I get? Yeah, ICA. The phase current ICA magnitude multiplied by square root of 3 will give you the line current IAA's magnitude. And in addition, there is a phase shift of 30 degrees in IAA. Similar things for the other two phases, lot of derivations again. You get the factor square root of 3 again and 30 degree phase shift again compared to the corresponding phase current. And similarly, in the last case also, you get the famous factor square root of 3. The line currents are up by a factor of square root of 3 compared to phase currents. The total complex power can be calculated after that, as usual. It turns out to be the same. I've not done the detailed calculation, but the formula turns out to be the same as it was for star-star connection in terms of line voltage and line currents. For delta-delta connection, let's say a sample calculation would look like this. A 440 volt, 50 hertz, 3-phase supply has delta connected load having 50 ohm between R and Y. That means A and B. 159 millihenry between Y and B, and 15.9 microfarad between B and R. So they are using RYB notations here. Determine A, the line current for the sequence RYB. Okay, so it's sequence ABC. And the value of star connected balanced resistors for the same power. Okay. It's a little bit involved. This is what the load is, okay? One branch has a pure capacitor, one branch has a pure inductor, and one branch has a pure resistor. And frequency is given also as 50 hertz. So we can calculate the reactances of inductor and capacitor, which is what I've done. Z between R and Y is obviously a real number, 50 ohm. Between Y and B, I have got an inductor, so I'll use the formula j omega L to get the impedance. It turns out to be almost j50 ohm. Between B and R, I'll get minus j upon omega C, which turns out to be almost minus 200 ohm. Given the values and the frequency that you have got, you can double check these values. Now, VRY, let's say, is the starting thing, which is the reference voltage. It is 440 into square root of 2 e to the power j0 degrees volts. Our VYB will be the same magnitude, but a phase shift of minus 120 degrees. And VBR will have the same magnitude, but a phase shift of plus 120 degrees. Okay, that's fair enough. Then you calculate IRY, which will be VRY divided by ZRY, which is simply 50 ohm. Phases can be treated as independent almost when it comes to calculations. Okay. So you simplify this, you get 8.8 plus J0 amperes for IRY. In polar form also you can do the calculation, it will be 8.8 amperes with 0 degree phase shift. IYB will be VYB divided by ZYB. And ZYB is J50 ohm. And VYB is given here as 440 square root of 2 e to the power minus J120 volts. So you plug in all the values. You get the same magnitude as you got for the previous current, but phase shift will be different here. And similarly for the third case also. Here, keep in mind that ZBR is actually minus J200 ohm. So the magnitude of the current in this case will be different from the magnitude in the other two cases. Because for the first two impedances, you had 50 ohm. In one case, it was real. In the other case, it was imaginary. But for the third case, you have minus J200 ohm. So obviously, the current will be different. The magnitude also will be different. Okay, so once you have got all this, you calculate the line current using these KCL formulas. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that there is no calculation mistake here. IR, IY, IB. Okay, so check these yourself. Then power calculations. PRY will be magnitude of IRY square Z. I'm not going to complex power. I'm going only to consumed power. So I can use these simple formulas. Reactive power can also be calculated by using these well-known formulas. Obviously, if the load has purely reactive element in a branch, reactive power will be 0 for sure. That's what we are seeing here. Okay. So essentially, even intuitively, you could have seen that the load has a resistance in only one phase or in one branch, and in the other two branches, it has got purely reactive elements. So power consumption will happen only in one branch. Okay. That is what turns out to be true if you look at the total result. The Q part will be non-zero in the two branches in which we have pure inductance or pure capacitance. but real part P will not be there in those two cases. Anyway, at the end, you sum up all the complex powers to get the total complex power. And then you take the real part of that, that will give you the total consumed power. Okay, now they want you to repeat that problem when the load has changed to something more complex. Each branch has got a complex impedance now. It is a nightmare to do the calculations, I'm telling you. That's why simulation tools are brought in. I've tried my best to do this calculation, praying to God that there is no calculation mistake. ZRY, you have to calculate carefully. ZYB, very carefully again, and ZBR also very carefully again. Theory is not difficult, it is the implementation that takes a lot of effort and double checking. These are the voltages as usual. Then you do these calculations, but now ZRY, etc. are very different from what they were in the previous problem. Now I think P and Q will be non-zero in all the three branches because each branch has a complex impedance. So please check all these calculations. It was a nightmare for me to come up with these answers. Total S finally. And this is the diagram I got. Hopefully there's no mistake, but you should at least be confident in terms of explaining how these things are done. Even if you're not able to do all the calculations, exam after all is not that long. You cannot be expected to do these calculations. One such problem will take 1 hour, I'm telling you, in the exam. I know for sure. I cannot give you these problems in the exam, but your career is much beyond your exams, If you end up in power industry, you should be able to feel comfortable in explaining how these calculations are done. Simulation tools are generally there to make sure no mistakes are happening in calculations. But you see the amount of complex algebra involved in calculations. By the way, I have not shown, but even in a balanced delta-delta system, it can be shown that the instantaneous power will have no time-dependent component. It was too much for me to try to tackle, but I know people have shown it for sure. Okay. We have seen some of these problems already. Yeah, this one we had seen already, figuring out the phase sequence, so I will not bother you with this. This is star-star connection. There are typographical mistakes in this problem. We noticed last time we were looking at it. But otherwise, it is a very good example of an unbalanced three-phase YY analysis. Each wire, whether neutral or transmission line wire, has a complex impedance. But unfortunately, they did not correct typographical mistakes here. Next problem is delta-delta system. Yeah, this is something you may now hopefully relate to. It's an ideal case. That means transmission lines have no losses. At least they are not showing in the diagram. The three voltages have equal magnitude as we want them to be, 13.2 kilovolt. And then the phase shift is, of course, 0 degree, minus 120 degree, and plus 120 degree, as expected. The three branches of the balance load have equal impedance, Z. Fine. This is how I am also using this symbols, which are similar to these. So the driving point here is that a line current will not be equal to phase current. It will be algebraic sum of two currents coming in from the two different phases at node A, at node B, and at node C. I'm talking on the generator side, right? And on the load side also, the line current coming in will actually get divided to give you two different phase currents. At capital A, you'll have IAA coming in and getting divided, not equally, of course. Well, actually equally in this case, maybe. We don't know. But in general, not equally. So that current will get divided and will give you phase currents on the load side. Calculations are there, but you should appreciate the bigger picture as well. So now look at the calculations. Magnitude of IAB. Since there is no loss in the transmission lines, the total 13.2 kilovolt would appear across capital A, capital B. Okay, that divided by the complex value of Z should give you the current capital A, capital B, current between capital A and capital B. That's what they are doing here. 13.2 becomes 13,200 volts, 0 degree phase shift. Let's look at the load. The load is supposed to be, how much is Z? Yeah, 100 minus J75. Fine. So this time around, there is no calculation, no typographical mistake, I think. You can check the calculations though. 13.2 kilovolt, I suppose, is RMS. So the current value that will come out will also be RMS current. Similarly, IBC, you will have 13,200 volt, and between B and C, between capital B and capital C, you will see the voltage V small b small c, which means 13.2 with 120 degree phase shift kilovolt. So plug it in. The Z value is the same in all the three cases, which is nice. You should be able to get this IBC value. And similarly for ICA also. So three branch currents in the load side are known. Okay. Then you got to calculate. Actually, what they have done is they have used the well-known formulas, which I proved in my document, square root of 3 and 30 degree phase shift. But ideally speaking, you should be calculating current in the branch small a, small c, okay, by dividing 13.2 kilovolt with minus 120 degree phase shift with Z. And same thing for the other two phases on the generator side. Then you apply KCL at small a, small b, and small c to get the line currents. That is the theory. But okay, they have used well-known results. Correction factors of square root of 3 has been applied directly, and minus 30 degree phase correction has been applied directly. So fine, no issue. Okay. This problem, I'm showing it to you to at least make you feel that these are problems which are related to almost real life, and they involve a lot of calculations. A three-phase line, transmission line, I mean, has an impedance of so much per phase. The line feeds two balanced three-phase loads connected in parallel. Oh God, that's getting too complicated. The first load is absorbing a total of so much and so much of kVAR also. Maybe we will not bother about this problem. This will confuse you too much. Forget it. Okay, now this is where I don't want you to read the solution, but I want you to read the problem carefully. I don't know whether you have been taught the instrument called wattmeter. Most likely not. But it is one of the key instruments used in power systems to monitor wattage. Wattage means P value, real power. And to measure power, there are several methods. One of them is known as 2-watt meter method. One is known as 3-watt meter method, and so on. So this problem is based on that. I'm not going to ask you to bother about solution right now. Okay. But this gives me the impetus to move on and look at the large variety of measuring instruments that are always associated with power systems. Some of them are probably known to you already, some of them may not be. CRO is well known to you, so I'm not going to waste your time on that. CRO is used, at least on the generating side, if necessary, for diagnostic purposes. Okay. Obviously, the quantities that you are interested in measuring are voltage, current, power, and energy. Voltages are measured by using voltmeters. Currents are measured by using ammeters or current meters. Powers are measured using wattmeters. And by the way, since power can be a complex number, both P and Q measurements may be necessary. P measurement is done using wattmeter. Q measurement is done using VAR meters. And energy meters, these are the meters that you see in your homes, measuring how much energy you are consuming. They take wattmeters or power meters and integrate the output of it over the time period that you are looking at. So 4 different instruments, 4 different variety of instruments encountered all the time in power systems are voltmeter, ammeter, wattmeter, and energy meter. And on top of it, VAR meter. And some more instruments are also necessary. Resistance meter may be necessary for diagnostic purposes. And CRO, as I said, may be needed in some cases. And there is something called multimeter. You have seen it in the lab. They, of course, are the first tool all technicians and engineers carry with them when they are working on power systems. Multimeters are combination of resistance meter, voltmeter, and ammeter. They cannot measure power, yes, but they can measure current, voltage, and resistance. Multimeters can be digital or analog. You know all this, hopefully. So most important thing is to tell you what is inside these instruments. At least the theory that you may have been taught or may not have been taught in the past needs to be revisited. Let me show you a small PPT to explain what I am trying to tell you here. Before I move to other topics, it's probably worth looking at. Okay, wait, let me open the other document, PDF file. That would be better, I think. Yeah. Power systems typically work with AC, so DC meters may not be needed all the time, but there are things. As we progress along the course, you'll see that DC input is also necessary for a lot of generators. So DC machines are there, DC generators are there also. That's why DC meters are included in this PPT. DC meters essentially are fundamental, and AC is generally measured by rectifying it and converting it into DC, and then making appropriate correction in the reading observed. So the key is to design DC meters first and then convert them into AC meters. One component which is very old but still very useful in building voltmeters and ammeters is what we call moving coil galvanometer. There's a lot of theory behind it. This is something whose pointer deflects based on how much current is going in the coil around that pointer, because a magnetic field would be produced by that current, and that would generate a torque on the pointer, which will rotate based on how much current is going in. That is the funda here. I think you were taught all this in physics courses anyway. but I'm still showing it to you to refresh your memory. It is also known as D'Arsonval galvanometer, deflection type galvanometer. That is another word for it. It typically takes only 100 microamperes to make the pointer rotate fully. Fully means full deflection, not 360 degrees, but full scale. So left to itself, it cannot measure more than 100 microampere current. We have to do some innovative things to use it to measure currents higher than 100 microamperes. I'll come to that in a few minutes. First, the principle of operation. The electric current flows through a wire coil placed in the magnetic field of a permanent magnet. Okay, all this is built in. You don't see it from outside. The magnetic forces on the current carrying wires create a net torque on the coil. The coil turns and there's a coil attached also. This is all mechanical part of it. But basically the coil turns and it turns by an angle which is proportional to the amount of current flowing in the coil. As simple as that. Not proportional maybe, but it's related to it for sure. By, I think, sine theta function. So the arrow attached to the coil can be measured or can be used to measure the amount of current going through the coil. That's the simple philosophy behind this instrument. So the scale behind the moving arrow is an indication of the numerical value of the current flowing through the coil. And as I said, only 100 microampere is enough to make the pointer go full scale. So as it is, this galvanometer cannot measure large currents. It will break down. Now, how to convert the galvanometer in an ammeter? First, look at the symbol for ammeter. You know all this, I'm sure. So I'm not going to waste too much of your time. This is the symbol for ammeter. It is connected in series with the branch in which you want to measure the current. You know all this, I'm sure. It is supposed to have a low resistance so that it doesn't drop any voltage across it or very little voltage across it. Okay. Now, since you want to measure large currents and galvanometer itself cannot handle large currents, what you do is you take a large portion of the current and bypass it through a shunt resistance across the galvanometer. And then you do calculations accordingly to get the relationship between the unknown current and the deflection produced in the galvanometer. This is the circuit diagram for a typical ammeter based on galvanometer that I have shown. You take the galvanometer which has some internal resistance, let's say small r. It's not physical resistance, it's internal resistance, but it is still shown here. So between capital A and capital B, you have the galvanometer. Across that, you connect a shunt resistance, whose value you can calculate based on how much current you would like to measure. If the total current to be measured is capital I, and you want the galvanometer current Ig to be less than 100 microampere or at the most 100 microampere, then it is obvious that the current flowing through the shunt resistor Is should be I minus Ig, right? And on top of it, Ig multiplied by R should be equal to Is multiplied by Rs. Simple circuit theory. These two equations together can be used to calculate the required Rs for a given I, and assuming that Ig and R are known for the galvanometer that you have been given. We'll do the numerical example later, but this is the basic idea. You divert the bulk of the main current through the shunt path so that it doesn't have to go through the galvanometer, and galvanometer would remain safe. But at the end, you make the corrections to correlate the value of capital I with the value of a deflection seen. That means the value of IG that is actually going in. The meter looks like this. It's a DC meter. These are hundreds of them will be seen in a power system. At every instrument, you'll see ammeters and voltmeters, measuring things, monitoring things, reporting things, raising alarms, etc., etc. Software is also getting into the game seriously to make systems intelligent and smart. Voltmeter again uses a galvanometer. This is the symbol. Voltmeter is supposed to be connected in parallel to the two nodes across which you want to measure the voltage. This is the symbol. Okay. You use the galvanometer again to build a voltmeter, but now I'll show you in a minute. This is the way the voltmeter is supposed to be connected across the load R. Okay. Now this is the voltmeter description. Voltmeter is made by putting a high series resistance with the galvanometer, so that the current going through the galvanometer is still not large enough, and we can still correlate the current going in with the voltage that we actually want to measure. I'll show that in a minute. This is the circuit diagram for a voltmeter. The galvanometer itself is denoted by capital G along with the small r, which is the internal resistance of the galvanometer. In addition to that, you put an extra resistance in series. They are calling it RM, I think. Fine. Okay. Whatever you want to call it, that's okay. Okay. Actually, it's RA, I think. Whatever it is, it's an external resistance. I call it REXT, external resistance. So what will happen is, if the amount of voltage that you want to measure is applied between capital A and capital B, it will create a current which will be V divided by RM plus R. Okay, and you will ensure that RM is high enough that even for the maximum possible voltage that you can expect, the value of IG will never exceed 100 microamperes. And once you have ensured that, it is a matter of figuring out the relationship between the current going in the galvanometer and the voltage that you would like to measure, which is the voltage between A and B. This is very easy calculation. I'll show you an example later. This is how DC voltmeters look. You have seen them, I'm sure. Then there are resistance meters. I will not bother you too much with it. You know the theory. You apply a certain known voltage across a resistor, measure the current going in, and take the ratio to get the resistance value. Several ways of implementing it. Ohm meters can be of several types, depending on the nature of resistance and the value range of the resistance. For very small resistances, the methods are very different. For very high resistances, the methods are very different. For medium values, the methods are different. Resistance measurement is a very lengthy topic for discussion. I'm not going to go in that direction as far as possible. But be aware that resistance measurement is a must in power system diagnostics and operation. In a lot of cases, multimeter might be okay. This is ohm meter circuit. The basic funda is simple. Applied voltage is known to you. You measure the current that is created by that voltage when you connect the resistance across it, and then apply Ohm's law. A lot of things are there in the multimeter to improve accuracy, to ensure good calibration, etc. I will not waste your time on that. So this is about the instruments. More important that I want you to be aware of is actually the watt meter, but I'm not going to talk too much about that today. One more small PPT, then maybe I can show you a design example first. Yeah, that would be better, I think. Ammeter design, simple calculation. I have got an ammeter, a galvanometer, whose internal resistance is given to me and whose maximum current carrying capacity is also given to me, which is supposed to be 100 microampere in most cases. And this is the way the connections are made. You connect a small shunt resistance in parallel with the galvanometer so that a large amount of input current is bypassing the galvanometer. Okay. So the two equations that you would need are shown here. Total I coming in will be the summation of I through the shunt resistor and the I value through the galvanometer. Okay. And RSH into ISH will also be equal to RG into IG. RG is the internal resistance of the galvanometer. You solve these two equations. Assume that IG is 100 microampere, which is true in most practical galvanometers. And let's assume that the maximum current we want to measure is 100 milliamperes. And let's say that the galvanometer's internal resistance is 10 ohm. Okay. Suppose these values are given to us. So your objective is to figure out how much RSH would be needed. The required value of shunt resistance is the design challenge. You can solve these two equations, 1 and 2, and try to figure out the formula for RSH. So many ways of doing it. I think you can take the value of ISH from equation 1, ISH from equation 2, and equate the two. You'll get a formula for. I did not go for formula. Actually, I did the calculations directly. ISH will be, let's say we are measuring the maximum current 100 milliampere, which is I. Out of that, 100 microampere is allowed to go through IG, so go through the galvanometer. That means IG is 100 microampere. So the difference, 100 milliampere minus 100 microampere, should be the current through the shunt resistance. That is ISH. I went for calculations directly. Okay, so ISH is known. The voltage across the galvanometer will be RG into IG, and which should be same as RSH into ISH. That gives you the second formula. RSH equal to RG IG upon ISH. Plug in all the values. You get the required shunt resistance value to be almost 10 milliohm in this case. So in the galvanometer, if you connect a 10 milliohm resistance across it, the entire assembly will be able to measure up to 100 milliampere current without damaging the galvanometer. This is theory. In practice, it's not that easy to get a 10 milliohm resistance accurately. What we normally do is we put a large number of small resistors in parallel to get to this small value. That's why practical ammeters have more than one resistance in shunt, because you want to be able to implement 10 milliohm as accurately as possible. One 10 milliohm resistance may be available in the market, but it may not be able to handle the large amount of current you are putting through it. And accuracy will be questionable. All resistors have tolerances, plus minus 5% for sure. Even in the best case, plus minus 1% or 2%. So it is better from that point of view also, if you have several resistors in parallel to realize this 10 milliohm value. Okay, that is the practical side of implementation. That's why multimeters can become bulky They have a circuit inside which has several resistors in parallel with the galvanometer. Now voltmeter design, let's see how we do it. I'm assuming that I want to measure a 100 volt max value. And I would assume that RG, the galvanometer internal resistance, is 10 ohm, as I did in the previous problem. And I would assume that the maximum allowed current in the galvanometer is 100 microampere, which is the reality anyway. So the series resistance, I'm calling it RSE. How much should it be? That is the question. Simple Ohm's law would give you the answer. V divided by RSE plus RG should not exceed 100 microampere. Use that. RG is known to you, V is known as 100 volt, IG is known as 100 microampere. Figure out RSE required. It turns out to be 1 mega ohm in this case. It's a very large resistance you need in series. Again, it's not that easy to get it accurately. So if necessary, you may go for a series combination of several accurate resistors. Okay. But theory is simple. As far as the design of voltmeter and ammeter is concerned, there's nothing very difficult. Now, the real thing is wattmeters. Wattmeters essentially, let me tell you without showing you any documents. In voltmeters and ammeters, you have one coil and the attached pointer that rotates. In wattmeters, you have two coils. One coil produces deflection proportional to the voltage across the load, and the other coil produces deflection proportional to the current going through the load. And what we do is we take the combined torque produced and put it on a single deflection or single pointer, so that the pointer moves by an amount which depicts the power. Voltage into current is power, right? So if I take one coil operating based on the current flowing and the other coil operating based on the voltage across the load, and I combine the torque produced by both the coils in a single deflection, I will get the power reading. That is the theory here. Yeah, this is the diagram. This is what I wanted to show you. It's a single phase power meter, conceptually drawn. The source, of course, is known to you, and it is supplying some current to the load Z on the right hand side. Normally, the load will be supplied directly by the source, but now you want to know how much power is going in, at least the real part. So you put this machine in between, or this instrument in between, which is called power meter. You see the construction? The power meter is shown within the dotted rectangle. It lies between source and load. It actually has got three terminals coming out. On the top, on the left side, one terminal, on the right side, one terminal, and at the bottom, there is a common terminal. Okay. You can say 4 terminals if you want. But in the bottom, the 2 terminals are at the same potential. So people call it a 3-terminal instrument. What you do is you break the connection to the load and put the current coil in series. It's all done for you inside the instrument. You just have to take the appropriate connection from the wattmeter and connect it appropriately, as they describe in the operating manual of the instrument. So once those connections are made correctly, the current coil will see the load current flowing through it, while the voltage coil will see a current proportional to the voltage across the load. And these are in complex domain, by the way. And they are not showing here. The torque generated by current coil and torque generated by voltage coil are applied to the same needle, so that the needle sees a torque proportional to the power and deflects accordingly. What we do is we put a torsion spring to compensate for the torque generated, and the needle comes to a steady state condition based on how much power is flowing in the load, which is also determined by how much counteracting torque you have applied mechanically. Otherwise, the needle will continuously rotate, and that is the principle on which energy meters are designed. But right now, in power meter, you will not allow the deflection to go on for 360 degrees continuously. So you put a mechanical spring to counteract that torque, and the value is known to you. So it is possible to calibrate the deflection produced against the real power that the load is seeing. Okay. The same thing, by the way, here we are using the formula V RMS I RMS cos phi. It is all done in calibration in the instruments. You could possibly convert the same setup for VAR meter also. Only thing is, in designing it, you will be using the formula V RMS I RMS sin phi, because that is the value of Q. If you remember the complex power formulas, the P was given by V RMS I RMS cos phi. I'm talking single phase. And Q was given by V RMS I RMS sin phi. Right? So conceptually, wattmeter can do VAR meter job also, as long as you have this 90-degree phase shift. That means instead of cosine phi, you have to use sin phi. If that is included in calibration, then this assembly has the potential to become a VAR meter also. If not, what we do is we sample voltage and current values at various values of time and take the digital data out and plot it. And from the waveforms also, we can figure out the average power, which is the real power, and the imaginary power. A lot of power measurement techniques are there, which are based on digitizing the readings rather than mechanically measuring them. But traditionally, the wattmeter method meant a mechanical deflection in the needle. Even today, a lot of wattmeters are around which use the mechanical deflection, but slowly they are getting replaced by digital wattmeters, where the mechanical portion is completely gone. You digitize the waveforms for voltage and current, and then you do signal processing to come to the result that you want. Okay. This entire thing actually goes on and talks about a three-phase power measurement also, but I'll talk about that maybe later. Now, what are the various kinds of wattmeters? This is a simple thing I took from somewhere. You do not have to go through detailed construction for each of them, but at least the names must be familiar to you. Okay, read this. In fact, wattmeter combines the effect of voltmeter and ammeter in one unit. And the moving system is acted upon by a force proportional to VI product. Actually, VI cos phi. Before proceeding further, it is highly recommended to read, okay, fine, wattmeter construction, operation, fine. You can do that later. So the wattmeter has got two coils, voltage coil, which is also known as pressure coil, and the current coil, CC, PC and CC. I showed them in the previous document. The pressure coil produces a flux proportional to the voltage. The current coil produces a flux proportional to the current. Usually current coil is fixed and pressure coil is allowed to rotate its needle. So the pressure coil essentially moves its pointer or needle by an amount which can be calibrated against the unknown power. Now, what are the various types? At least remember the names. The principles of operation are very different in each case. Dynamometer type, wattmeter is the one we have been looking at. It uses galvanometer. Induction type is slightly different. It uses principle of induction. Let's put it this way. I'm not going to confuse you by giving too much detail. Electrostatic type is very different. It uses a different method to measure powers. And there are a lot of mechanical details in terms of how coil is suspended, etc., etc. Okay. Induction type, you can see it here. When I go to energy meters, I'll show you this construction in detail, because actually induction type energy meters are very popular. Induction type watt meters may not be that popular. Okay. Basically, what they do in induction type watt meters is they replace one of the coils by a rotating disc, metal disc. Electrostatic type is very different. They use Coulomb's law to figure out the